The Vanguard hovered silently above Earth, its sleek metallic hull reflecting the swirling storm clouds beneath. Inside the command center, Captain Zortok of the Thalaxian Survey Fleet studied the readouts with narrowed eyes. His exoskeleton shimmered under the blue light of the holographic displays, scales shifting in subtle patterns that indicated mild interest. "Another primitive world," he remarked, gesturing toward the view screen with one of his four limbs. "Preliminary scans indicate Class 4 gravity variations, atmospheric toxicity levels at 0.34 Raxons, and biological diversity index of 9.8. Lieutenant Rin glanced up from the weapons console, her scales rippling with amusement. "Just another day in paradise for the Deathworlds specialists, eh, Captain?" "Precisely." Zortok's voice carried no hint of emotion, a trait prized among the Thalaxian elite. The Galactic Alliance's Deathworld Survey program has rated this planet as a potential colonization candidate. After our success on Deathworld 9, with its gravity fluctuations and radiological storms, this should be mere jardinage. Dr. Airy approached from the science station, her movements deliberately precise. As the xenobiological specialist, she had reviewed the preliminary data with characteristic thoroughness. Earth possesses numerous parameters that would classify it as highly survivable by human standards, Captain, but their biology is remarkably adaptable. Zortok made a dismissive gesture. All species believe themselves to be adaptable until they face a true death world. That is why the Alliance tasks us with these surveys, to separate facts from biological hubris. The Vanguard's exterior illumination cut through the darkness as the ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. Lightning flashed around them, and thunder rolled across the landscape beneath. The Thalaxian crew moved with confident efficiency, each member donning their survival gear, adaptive exoskeletons, atmospheric filtration systems, and sensory augmentation devices. "Deploying landing struts," announced the navigation officer, compensating for atmospheric turbulence. The ship touched down with barely a tremor, a testament to Thalaxian engineering excellence. Rain lashed against the viewports as Zortok addressed his crew. "Remember, we have survived Deathworld 9. We have endured acid rains that would dissolve standard alloys. We have breathed air that would kill lesser species. Earth is a garden by comparison." He activated his personal environmental shield. "Begin standard survey protocols." The airlock hissed open, and immediately every alarm in their equipment began to sound. Radiation detectors blinked urgently. Toxin analyzers registered dozens of unknown compounds. Microbial sensors detected an unprecedented variety of organisms. "Captain," Dr. Airy's voice carried a hint of concern, an unusual breach of Thalaxian composure. "These readings exceed our preliminary estimates by 278%. The biodiversity alone is triggering system overloads." Zortok studied his own instruments with growing unease. "Adjust filtration to maximum. Deploy secondary containment protocols." He forced his voice to remain steady. "This is merely an unexpected variation, nothing we haven't handled before." But as they stepped onto Earth soil for the first time, Zortok couldn't suppress a ripple of uncertainty across his scales. The storm intensified around them, rain pelting their protective gear with surprising force. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark relief. "The electromagnetic disruptions are interfering with our scanners," Lieutenant Rin reported, "and these water droplets contain trace elements not in our database." Dr. Airy was already collecting samples, her equipment whirring as it processed the alien environment. "The microbial diversity is extraordinary. I'm detecting thousands of unknown bacterial and viral strains. Our immunity protocols will need constant updating." Zortok surveyed the darkened landscape, visibility reduced by the downpour. The Alliance briefing mentioned a research outpost nearby. Indigenous collaboration is part of our mandate. We will proceed to make contact. They trudged forward through the storm, their equipment continuing to register anomalies. The Thalaxian crew maintained formation, but Zortok noticed subtle signs of discomfort among them. Unnecessary adjustments to equipment, frequent monitoring of vital signs, excessive communication checks. After 20 minutes of hiking through increasingly difficult terrain, lights appeared through the rain. A structure materialized before them, primitive by Thalaxian standards, but sturdy enough to withstand the elements. Biosigns indicate multiple life forms inside, Dr. Airy reported, consistent with human parameters. Zortok approached the entrance and activated the Universal Translator. "This is Captain Zortok of the Galactic Alliance Survey Fleet. We come under peaceful scientific authority." The door opened, flooding the darkness with warm light. A human male stood in the doorway, remarkably underdressed for the hostile conditions, wearing only a simple fabric covering and no visible protective gear. "Well, I'll be damned," the human said, eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. The satellite images weren't lying. Come in, you'll catch your death out there." Zortok's translator struggled with the idiom before settling on an approximate meaning. He signaled his crew to enter, noting with scientific interest that the human showed no signs of distress from the storm's toxins or radiation. The interior of the structure was warm, filled with curious objects, and lacking any visible decontamination systems. 4 more humans were present, a female adult and 3 juveniles of varying developmental stages. "I'm Professor James Williams," the first human said, extending an appendage in what the cultural database identified as a greeting gesture. "This is my wife, Sarah, and our children, Emily, Tom, and Lucy. We're part of the Earth Environmental Research Team. We've been hoping the Alliance would respond to our signals." Zortok refrained from the physical contact. "Our sensors indicate dangerous levels of toxins and radiation in your atmosphere, yet you appear unprotected." Professor Williams laughed, an emotional display that caused Zortok's crew to exchange glances. "Oh, this little storm? It's just a bit of rain and thunder, nothing unusual for this region." "We've been expecting your arrival," Sarah Williams added, approaching with a steaming container. "Would you like some tea? You must be chilled from the rain." Dr. Airy's instruments immediately began analyzing the offered substance. "Captain, this beverage contains multiple alkaloids, including a nervous system stimulant called caffeine, as well as various organic compounds of unknown effect." Zortok considered the diplomatic implications. "I will sample the beverage as a gesture of goodwill." He deactivated a portion of his filtration system and accepted the container. The liquid was hot, uncomfortably so, and bitter as it touched his intake membranes. Zortok felt an immediate physiological response. His scales flared involuntarily, and his secondary respiratory system engaged automatically. "Are you all right?" Professor Williams asked, concern evident in his voice.
"Merely adapting," Zortok managed, trying to control the sudden secretion of defensive fluids from his epidermal glands. A viscous substance began to ooze between his scales.
"Oh my," Sarah exclaimed. "You're having a reaction. James, get the first aid kit." "That won't be necessary," Zortok insisted, even as his visual receptors began to cloud. "Our systems are designed to neutralize toxins." Dr. Airy was already scanning him. "Captain, your histamine levels are elevated. This appears to be an allergic response to compounds in the beverage." The Williams family moved with surprising efficiency. The adult female retrieved a small container of primitive medical supplies, while the juveniles cleared space on a nearby surface. "It's probably the tannins," Professor Williams said, examining Zortok's reaction with scientific interest rather than alarm. Fascinating how your skin responds. Is that a natural defense mechanism? Lieutenant Rin stepped forward protectively. Captain Zortok has survived the caustic rains of Deathworld 9. This minor reaction is inconsequential. Nevertheless, Dr. Airy interjected, perhaps we should avoid further consumption of Earth beverages until proper analysis is complete. Sarah Williams nodded understandingly. Of course, we have filtered water if you'd prefer. It's what we give the children when they're not feeling well. This comment caught Dr. Airy's attention. You filter your water, then you acknowledge the presence of contaminants? The Williams family exchanged amused glances. Well, yes, James explained. Nothing serious, just the usual chlorine, fluoride, and the occasional mineral or bacterial trace, standard municipal water treatment. You knowingly consume water containing bacterial traces? Lieutenant Rin asked, unable to hide her horror. Our immune systems handle it, Sarah said with a shrug. In fact, some exposure to environmental bacteria is beneficial for developing proper immunity, especially in children. Dr. Airy's scales rippled with scientific fascination. You deliberately expose your young to pathogens as a form of immune training? Within reason, James clarified. Would you like to see our garden? We grow many of our own fruits and vegetables. It's a small step toward sustainability. The Thalaxian crew followed their hosts through the dwelling to an attached, transparent structure filled with plant life. Dr. Airy's instruments immediately began cataloging the diverse species. These are all food sources, she asked, examining a red spherical fruit offered by the youngest human. That's a tomato, Lucy explained proudly. I grew it myself. Dr. Airy scanned the object. It contains multiple acids, sugars, and compounds my sensors cannot immediately identify. But it's delicious, the child insisted. We wash them before eating, of course. Wash? Dr. Airy inquired. Yes, to remove dirt and pesticide residue, Sarah explained, demonstrating with a simple flow of water over the fruit. Lieutenant Rin observed the process with obvious skepticism. This primitive rinsing is your only decontamination method. Our nutritional processing requires 17 stages of purification. 17 stages? James Williams laughed. No wonder you look so shocked. Humans have co-evolved with our environment for thousands of years. Our bodies have adapted to handle most of what nature throws at us. Outside, a particularly loud thunderclap shook the structure. The youngest human child flinched and moved closer to her mother. Nothing to be afraid of, Lucy, Sarah reassured her, just the storm passing through. Lieutenant Rin activated a handheld scanner. There are flying organisms circling your dwelling. Potential predators? Tom, the middle child, peered out the window. Those are just sparrows. They're taking shelter under the eaves. Predatory avians congregating at your habitat? Lieutenant Rin's hand moved toward her sidearm. I can deploy sonic deterrent drones to eliminate the threat. What? No! James stepped forward quickly. They're harmless songbirds. They eat insects and seeds, not people. They're actually beneficial to have around. Lieutenant Rin's expression conveyed clear confusion. You permit potential threat species to nest near your dwelling. On Thalaxia, all non-essential wildlife is eliminated from habitation zones. Emily, the oldest child, frowned. That sounds horrible. Don't you enjoy nature? Enjoy? Zortok repeated, the concept clearly foreign in this context. Nature is not something to enjoy. It is something to survive. A moment of awkward silence followed, broken by Sarah Williams. Perhaps we should show you to your quarters. You must be tired after your journey. As the humans led them deeper into the dwelling, Zortok found himself increasingly unsettled. These humans not only survived in an environment teeming with toxins, radiation, and biological threats, they seemed to embrace it. They drank unprocessed beverages, ate minimally sanitized food, and coexisted with wildlife. Most disturbing of all, they exhibited emotional responses to these conditions, not just tolerance, but apparent pleasure. Later, after the humans had retired to their sleep chambers, Zortok convened with his crew in their assigned quarters. Initial assessments must be recalibrated, he stated flatly. The humans display unexpected adaptability to conditions we would classify as hostile. Their immune systems are remarkably robust, Dr. Airy observed, and their casual attitude toward environmental threats suggests long-term coevolution. Lieutenant Rin's scales flickered with skepticism, or perhaps they simply don't recognize the dangers. Their technology appears primitive compared to ours. Do not underestimate them, Zortok cautioned. The Alliance selected Earth for survey precisely because of anomalous readings. Tomorrow we will continue our investigation at their educational facility. It should provide insight into their knowledge base and social structures. As the Thalaxian crew prepared for their rest cycle, Zortok found himself staring out at the storm-lashed landscape. His training had prepared him for the physical challenges of alien worlds, but the humans' response to their environment defied rational explanation. They didn't merely survive their death world, they seemed to thrive in it, embracing conditions that would trigger emergency protocols among his people. For the first time since his graduation from the academy, Captain Zortok felt something dangerously close to an emotion: uncertainty. Morning arrived with surprising brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape glistening with moisture. Zortok's crew emerged from their quarters to find the Williams family engaged in their morning meal ritual. "Good morning," Sarah greeted them cheerfully. "Did you sleep well? The thunder was quite loud last night." "Our rest cycle was adequate," Zortok responded formally, "though our sensors detected unusual electromagnetic fluctuations during the storm." "Lightning," James explained, pouring a dark liquid into a container. "Perfectly normal. Coffee?" Remembering the previous evening's reaction, Zortok declined. "We have consumed our nutritional supplements." Emily, the oldest child, looked up from her food. "You don't eat real food, just supplements." "Efficient nutrition requires no unnecessary sensory components," Lieutenant Rin explained. "The concept of taste is a primitive biological function that the Thalaxian species has evolved beyond." The human children exchanged glances that suggested they found this information somehow disturbing. "We'll be taking you to the high school today," James said, changing the subject. "The principal has arranged for you to speak with the advanced science classes about your research. The students are very excited." "High school?" Dr. Airy queried. "An educational facility for adolescents," Sarah explained, "ages 14 to 18. Generally." Zortok nodded. "This will provide valuable data on your species' knowledge transmission methods." The journey to the educational facility was illuminating. The humans transported themselves in a wheeled vehicle powered by combustion of fossil fuels, a technology the Thalaxians had abandoned centuries ago. Throughout the journey, Zortok observed the surrounding environment with growing scientific interest. The settlement was densely populated, with individual dwelling units clustered together. Vegetation grew in carefully maintained patterns around structures. Most surprising was the abundance of non-sentient life forms: avians perched on artificial structures, small mammals traversing green spaces, and countless insects moving through the air. "Your species coexists with this level of biodiversity within your habitation zones?" Dr. Airy asked, her scanner continuously cataloging new species. "Of course," James replied, navigating the vehicle through traffic. "Cities have their own ecosystems. Some wildlife even adapts specifically to urban environments." "Fascinating," Dr. Airy murmured, making notes. "On Thalaxia, Urban zones are biologically sterile. Only designated preservation areas maintain non-essential species. They arrived at a large building surrounded by open spaces where dozens of young humans engaged in various activities. Some pursued a spherical object across a field, while others sat in groups, engaged in social interaction. "Here we are," James announced. "Westridge High School, home of the Fighting Badgers." Fighting Badgers? Lieutenant Rin's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon. "You keep combat-trained terrestrial mammals on the premises." Tom burst into laughter. "It's just the school mascot. It's not real." The Thalaxians were escorted into the building, drawing curious stares from the young humans they passed. Zortok noted that despite their primitive technology, the facility appeared adequately equipped for knowledge transmission, with visual display units and information storage devices visible in each room. Principal Rodriguez greeted them in a central office. "Welcome to Westridge. This is a historic occasion for our school. The students have been preparing questions all week." "We are pleased to facilitate knowledge exchange," Zortok responded formally. "The Galactic Alliance values educational development across all species." They were led to a large room filled with adolescent humans. As they entered, the room fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on the alien visitors. Zortok stepped forward. "Greetings, students of Earth. I am Captain Zortok of the Thalaxian Survey Fleet, representing the Galactic Alliance's Deathworld Research Initiative. My team specializes in survival adaptation to extreme planetary conditions." He proceeded to deliver a carefully prepared presentation on interstellar classification systems for planetary habitability, Thalaxian physiological adaptations, and the Alliance's scientific objectives. He used precise terminology and logical structure, explaining complex concepts with the clarity that had earned him commendations at the Academy. When he finished, he expected the respectful silence that typically followed his briefings. Instead, a forest of human appendages shot into the air, accompanied by a cacophony of voices. "One at a time, please," Principal Rodriguez intervened. "Dante, you first." A young male stood up. "Your species evolved without emotions? How do you form social bonds?" The question caught Zortok off guard. Social cohesion is maintained through logical mutual benefit. Emotions are inefficient evolutionary remnants that compromise rational decision-making. Another student raised her hand. "But without emotions like empathy, how do you care for sick or injured members of your society?" Resources are allocated based on projected recovery and future contribution potential, Lieutenant Rin explained. It is the most efficient system. The students' expression suggested they found this answer disturbing. "What about art?" asked another student. "Do you create music or literature?" Dr. Airy stepped forward. "Thalaxian culture produces technical documentation and historical records. Fictional narratives and non-functional sound patterns would serve no evolutionary purpose." A murmur ran through the room. Zortok sensed the interaction was not proceeding as expected. "Let me show you something," said Dante. The first questioner. He moved to a device in the corner of the room and activated it. Immediately, complex patterns of sound filled the space, what humans called music. Zortak's crew instinctively adjusted their auditory filters to dampen the unexpected sensory input, but Dr. Airy, after an initial flinch, did something unexpected. She deactivated her filter. "This pattern," she said, head tilted in concentration. "It contains mathematical progressions, but with deliberate variations that create—" "I don't have the terminology to describe it." "That's Beethoven's Fifth Symphony," Dante explained, "one of the most famous pieces of classical music on Earth." "But what function does it serve?" Lieutenant Rin asked, clearly perplexed. "It makes us feel things," a female student responded. "Inspired, moved, connected to something larger than ourselves." "Feel things," Zortok repeated. the concept alien to him. You deliberately seek sensory input that triggers emotional responses with no survival benefit? The students exchanged glances, as if the question itself were bizarre. Not everything is about survival, Dante said. Sometimes beauty is its own purpose. After the formal presentation, the Thalaxian crew was invited to observe various educational activities throughout the facility. Dr. Airy found herself drawn to what the humans called literature class, where young humans analyzed patterns of words that conveyed imaginary scenarios. Lieutenant Rin was assigned to a debate team session where adolescents engaged in formalized argumentation about resource allocation in their society. To her surprise, the arguments often invoked concepts like fairness and compassion rather than pure efficiency. Zortak accompanied Principal Rodriguez to observe a science experiment involving chemical reactions. The students worked in groups, some displaying remarkable inefficiency as they engaged in social behaviors unrelated to the task. Your educational methods seem to permit considerable deviation from optimal procedures, Zortak observed. Principal Rodriguez smiled. Education isn't just about transferring information. It's about developing the whole person, teaching them to think critically, work together, and find joy in discovery. Joy in discovery, Zortak repeated, a curious concept. Haven't you ever felt excitement when making a new scientific finding? The principal asked. Excitement is an emotion. Thalaxians evaluate discoveries based on objective utility, Zortak explained, but as he spoke, he recalled the ripple of interest he had felt when first reviewing Earth's unusual readings, a response he had carefully suppressed. Later that afternoon, the Williams family suggested an expedition to a nearby national park, where James was conducting research on ecosystem resilience. The Thalaxian crew agreed, seeing an opportunity to observe Earth's wilderness environments. As they traveled deeper into the forested area, Zortak's environmental sensors registered increasing biodiversity. The air contained countless organic compounds. The soil teemed with microorganisms, and the vegetation displayed remarkable variety. This area is maintained in its natural state? Dr. Airy asked, collecting samples. As much as possible, James confirmed. National parks are protected spaces where human impact is minimized to preserve natural ecosystems. You deliberately preserve uncontrolled biological systems. Lieutenant Rin seemed incredulous. On Thalaxia, such areas would be considered hazardous. That's the whole point, Emily explained, breathing deeply. Nature isn't meant to be controlled. We need wild places to remind us we're part of something bigger. The group hiked along a trail that ascended a hillside, offering increasingly expansive views of the landscape. The Williams children moved with surprising agility over the uneven terrain, often pausing to point out various life forms to the fascinated Dr. Airy. Weather alert, Lieutenant Rin announced suddenly, checking her atmospheric scanner. Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. Precipitation imminent. James glanced at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering with remarkable speed. She's right. That doesn't look good. We should head back. They had covered less than half the return distance when the storm broke. Rain fell in heavy sheets, reducing visibility. Wind whipped through the trees, sending branches crashing to the ground. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening thunder. Shelter protocol, Zortak commanded his crew, deploying their emergency environmental shields. Williams family, we can extend protection to you. But James shook his head. Too dangerous in this forest with the lightning. We need to keep moving toward the ranger station. Stay away from tall trees. The Thalaxians followed as the humans navigated the treacherous conditions with surprising competence. The children, rather than displaying panic, maintained formation and assisted each other over increasingly muddy terrain. A massive thunderclap coincided with a blinding flash directly ahead, A tree crashed down across the path, flames briefly licking at its trunk despite the rain. "Alternative route required," Zortok stated, scanning for options. "This way," Tom called, pointing to a narrow side trail. "It's longer but should get us to the ranger station." As they changed course, the storm intensified. The trail became a flowing stream of mud and debris. Lieutenant Rin slipped, her specialized footwear failing to grip the unfamiliar surface. Before any of her crew could react, Emily grabbed her arm, preventing her fall. "Careful," the human adolescent warned. "Step where I step." Lieutenant Rin's scales rippled with confusion at the assistance, but she complied. The detour led them deeper into the forest, where the canopy provided some shelter from the rain but increased the risk from falling branches. Zortok calculated rapidly deteriorating survival probabilities. "We appear to be lost," he announced, checking his positioning system. "Electromagnetic interference is disrupting navigation." "We're not lost," Lucy insisted. "The ranger station is near Mirror Lake, and water always flows downhill toward the lake." "The child is correct," James confirmed. "If we follow this stream, it will lead us to safety." Zortak hesitated, unaccustomed to relying on such primitive navigation methods. His training dictated deployment of emergency beacons and establishment of a defensive position to await rescue. "Captain," Dr. Airy interrupted his thoughts, "I believe we should follow the humans' guidance. They display evolutionary adaptations to this environment that our protocols do not account for." It was a logical observation, if unconventional. Zortok nodded. "We will proceed according to indigenous expertise." The group continued downhill, following the swelling stream. The humans moved with purpose, occasionally pointing out hazards or offering assistance on difficult terrain. After 20 minutes of arduous progress, a structure appeared through the rain, the ranger station. Inside, soaked but uninjured, the Williams family efficiently distributed towels and arranged seating near a heating element. The Thalaxian crew engaged their drying protocols, scales vibrating to shed moisture. "Well, that was exciting," Sarah commented, helping Lucy change into dry clothing. "Exciting?" Lieutenant Rin's voice carried a rare note of disbelief. "We experienced multiple life-threatening conditions simultaneously. But we handled it," Tom said proudly. "Teamwork makes the dream work, right?" Zortok observed the humans' behavior with growing scientific interest. Despite having just escaped potential harm, they displayed no signs of continuing distress. Instead, they engaged in social bonding behaviors, sharing food, recounting the experience with apparent pleasure, and attending to each other's needs. "Your species has remarkable coping mechanisms," he observed. James nodded. "Humans are resilient. We've faced everything from ice ages to pandemics. We survive because we adapt, we cooperate, and we find meaning even in hardship." "Find meaning?" Dr. Airy inquired. "Through story, art, connection," Sarah explained. "Our emotions aren't weaknesses, they're tools for survival. Fear keeps us alert to danger. Love motivates us to protect each other. Joy gives us reasons to continue when things get difficult." As the storm gradually subsided, a park ranger arrived to check on them. After ensuring everyone was safe, she invited the group to an impromptu educational session she was conducting for visitors stranded by the weather. In a common area, the ranger displayed various natural specimens and explained their ecological roles. The other humans listened with evident interest, occasionally asking questions or expressing appreciation for particularly colorful items. "These emotional responses to information acquisition are deliberate?" Zortok asked James quietly. "Of course, learning is more effective when it engages emotions. That's why we tell stories in our classrooms, conduct hands-on experiments, and encourage students to find personal connections to the material." Zortok considered this approach against the strictly rational Thalaxian educational system inefficient but intriguing. 2 days later, the Thalaxian crew received notification that a Galactic Alliance delegation was arriving to conduct a formal assessment of their preliminary findings. Lieutenant Mardex, a senior evaluator known for his strict adherence to protocol, would be leading the review. The meeting was arranged at a conference facility near the Williams Research Station. Representatives from Earth's scientific community would attend, along with Alliance officials and the Thalaxian survey team. "This evaluation is premature," Zortok informed his crew as they prepared. "Our survey is incomplete." Perhaps Lieutenant Mardex was concerned by our initial reports. Dr. Airy suggested, "Our observations do challenge several established Alliance classifications." Zortak's scales shifted in a pattern indicating concentration. "We will present our findings objectively. The data will speak for itself." The conference room filled with an unusual mixture of species: humans in formal attire, Thalaxian officials in regulation uniforms, and representatives from 3 other Alliance races. Lieutenant Mardex entered last, his bearing rigid even by Thalaxian standards. "Captain Zortok," he acknowledged with minimal courtesy, "your preliminary report contains several anomalies that require immediate clarification." "We stand by our observations, Lieutenant," Zortok responded. "Earth presents unique characteristics that challenge standard classification parameters." Mardek's scales rippled with skepticism. "You suggest that a species with minimal technological advancement, no natural defenses, and high emotional reactivity has successfully adapted to a Deathworld environment. This contradicts fundamental Alliance survival theory." "Nevertheless, it appears to be the case," Dr. Airy interjected. "Human physiological and social adaptations compensate for their physical limitations in unexpected ways." The debate quickly escalated into a formal scientific challenge, a ritualized Thalaxian procedure for resolving theoretical disputes. Mardex, representing the conservative Alliance perspective, argued that Earth's classification as a potential death world must be an error, as no emotionally driven species could successfully inhabit such an environment long-term. "The evidence is clear," Mardex stated. "Species that prioritize emotional expression over rational survival strategies inevitably fail when confronted with hostile environmental conditions. The human's apparent success must be temporary or illusory." Zortok found himself in the unexpected position of defending observations that contradicted his own previous beliefs. "The data suggests otherwise. Despite environmental toxins, radiation, extreme weather events, and biological hazards, humans have not merely survived but established complex civilizations." "Through technological buffers," Mardex countered, "not unlike our own." "No," Dr. Airy said, stepping forward with uncharacteristic assertiveness. "Their technology is rudimentary compared to ours. Their success derives from biological adaptations, social cooperation, and cognitive flexibility, including emotional responses we would consider irrational." The human representatives observed the exchange with growing concern. Dante, who had been invited to represent the educational perspective, raised his hand to speak. "If I may," he said when acknowledged, "you're discussing emotion as if it were separate from survival. For humans, our emotions are survival tools." Mardek's scales flickered dismissively. "Explain." "Fear triggers physiological responses that prepare us for danger. Empathy strengthens social bonds that help us cooperate in crisis. Curiosity drives us to understand our environment. Joy motivates us to continue despite hardship." Dante gestured toward the windows, where rain had begun to fall again. "Even our appreciation for beauty connects us to our world and gives us reason to protect it." "Sentiment," Mardex declared flatly, "not strategy." "But it works," Dante insisted. "When the climate crisis threatened our civilization, It wasn't just scientific knowledge that saved us. It was our emotional connection to the natural world, our love for future generations, our collective hope for a better tomorrow that motivated global action. The debate continued for hours, growing increasingly technical as both sides presented evidence and counter-arguments. Throughout the exchange, Zortok noticed something unusual happening within his crew. Dr. Airy referenced human poetry when discussing adaptive perspectives. Lieutenant Rin described the tactical advantages of empathetic leadership during crisis response. Most disturbing of all, Zortok recognized unfamiliar sensations within himself, a heightened alertness when defending his observations, a sense of connection with his human hosts, a curious warmth when recalling the Williams children navigating the storm with courage and cooperation. Suddenly, alarms sounded from multiple Thalaxian environmental monitors. The delegation's medical officer rushed forward with a scanner, moving systematically among the survey crew. "Biochemical anomalies detected," he announced with evident concern. "Elevated levels of oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine in all survey team members. Emotional contamination confirmed." The conference room fell silent. Emotional contamination was a serious charge among Thalaxians, suggesting a fundamental failure of rational discipline. "Explain this aberration, Captain," Mardex demanded, stepping back as though the condition might be contagious. Before Zortok could respond, Sarah Williams stood up. "Those aren't contaminants. They're natural neurochemicals that facilitate bonding, pleasure, and motivation in many species. Your crew isn't contaminated. They're experiencing normal responses to positive social interactions." "Impossible," Mardex declared. "Thalaxians evolved beyond such primitive mechanisms centuries ago." "Did you?" Dr. Airy asked quietly. "Or did we simply suppress them? The neurological structures still exist in our physiology. Perhaps they were never evolutionary remnants, but adaptations we failed to recognize." Mardek's scales flared with alarm. "This proves my point. Earth is dangerous not because of its physical conditions, but because it triggers regression to primitive emotional states. The survey team has been compromised. I recommend immediate evacuation and quarantine." "That would be premature," Zortok countered, struggling to maintain his composure as unfamiliar sensations continued to surface. "Our mission is to understand this world fully. Terminating the survey would represent a failure of scientific integrity. Your judgment is impaired by emotional contamination," Mardex insisted. "Or perhaps enhanced by emotional integration," Dr. Airy suggested. "Our supposedly superior rational perspective failed to predict or explain human survival on this planet. Perhaps our understanding is incomplete." The tension in the room was palpable. Alliance protocols for emotional contamination were clear: immediate removal and neurological purging. Yet Zortok found himself reluctant to accept this outcome. "I propose an alternative," he said finally. "A formal comparative study of survival strategies, rational versus emotional, under controlled conditions." Mardex hesitated. "Elaborate." "A series of survival challenges designed to test different approaches to environmental threats. If the human emotional model proves inferior, we will submit to standard decontamination procedures. If not, the Alliance must reconsider its classification parameters." The proposal was unorthodox but scientifically sound. After consultation with his superiors, Mardex reluctantly agreed. The next week was devoted to preparing the experimental protocol. 5 challenges would test different aspects of survival adaptation, physical endurance, problem-solving under pressure, resource allocation, threat response, and social cohesion during crisis. Teams were formed, one following traditional Thalaxian rational protocols, the other incorporating human emotional approaches. To ensure objectivity, monitoring would be conducted by neutral Alliance observers. The first challenge took place in a simulated extreme environment chamber, testing physical endurance under harsh conditions. The rational team approached the task with methodical efficiency, carefully measuring energy expenditure and calculating optimal rest intervals. The emotional team, led by Dante and including Dr. Airy, took a different approach. They encouraged each other verbally, celebrated small victories, and adapted their strategy based on individual needs rather than statistical averages. To Mardex's evident surprise, the emotional team completed the challenge with 23% greater efficiency and significantly lower stress markers. Mutual encouragement appears to trigger endorphin release that enhances physical performance. Dr. Airy explained during the analysis session, what we previously considered irrational behavior actually serves a biological function. The second challenge involved solving a complex mechanical problem with limited resources and time pressure. Again, the emotional team's approach, featuring collaborative brainstorming, intuitive leaps, and celebration of incremental progress, proved more effective than the rational team's linear, hierarchical method. By the third challenge, focusing on resource allocation during a simulated scarcity scenario, patterns were emerging that could not be dismissed. The emotional team consistently demonstrated greater adaptability, creativity, and resilience under pressure. "This is unexpected," Mardex admitted after the fourth challenge concluded. His scales displayed a pattern Zortok had never seen before, suggesting internal conflict bordering on distress. "Not unexpected," Zortok corrected, "simply contradictory to our assumptions. The data speaks for itself." The final challenge was the most demanding, a complex social cooperation task requiring coordination among team members with deliberately conflicting information. The rational team's approach, based on strict information hierarchies and logical prioritization, faltered when communication breakdowns occurred. The emotional team, however, developed informal leadership structures based on trust and empathy, allowing them to adapt quickly when formal protocols failed. They completed the challenge in half the projected time. As the final results were compiled, Mardex stood before the assembled participants, his posture rigid but his scales showing subtle patterns of uncertainty. "The experimental outcomes are clear," he stated formally. "The integration of emotional processing with rational analysis produces superior survival outcomes in complex, dynamic environments. This contradicts established alliance theory regarding Deathworld adaptation." He paused, visibly struggling with the implications. "As senior evaluator, I am obligated to recommend revision of the Galactic Alliance's classification parameters for survival adaptation. Earth will be reclassified not as a death world requiring colonization assistance, but as an adaptive crucible, a planet whose challenging conditions have produced evolutionary innovations worthy of study." The human representatives exchanged pleased glances. Professor Williams stepped forward. "We welcome continued scientific exchange," he said. "Humans have much to learn from Thalaxian rationality and technological advancement, just as you may benefit from understanding our emotional adaptations." Mardex's scales flickered with hesitation. "There remains the matter of emotional contamination among the survey crew. Standard protocol requires neurological purging upon return to Thalaxia." Zortok felt an unfamiliar sensation, something like the human concept of dread, the thought of returning to pure rationality, of losing these new perceptions and connections, triggered a physiological response he could not suppress. "I propose an alternative," Dr. Airy said, stepping forward. "The survey team has not been contaminated but enhanced. We request permission to continue our research on Earth as cultural exchange specialists, studying the integration of emotional and rational processing as an evolutionary advantage." Mardex considered the proposal unprecedented, but the data supports further investigation. "I will submit your request to the Science Directorate." 3 months later, Zortok stood in the Williams garden, observing as Dr. Airy carefully tended plants alongside Lucy. The young human was explaining the concept of favorite colors to the increasingly receptive xenobiologist. "The red ones make me happy," Lucy explained. "Do you have a favorite?" Dr. Airy considered the question with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "The blue flowers produce an aesthetic response I find pleasant." "You mean you like them?" Lucy translated with a grin. "Yes," Dr. Airy admitted, "I like them." Nearby, Lieutenant Rin was engaged in what humans called basketball with Tom and Emily, her natural Thalaxian agility adapting surprisingly well to the sport. Her scales displayed patterns of excitement that would have been considered inappropriate on their homeworld. The Science Directorate had approved their extended mission, with the condition that they document all emotional integration experiences for analysis. What had begun as a standard survey had evolved into the Alliance's first long-term cultural exchange program. Professor Williams joined Zortok, offering a container of the beverage they had carefully reformulated to be compatible with Thalaxian physiology. "How's the tea?" he asked. "Acceptable," Zortok replied, then corrected himself. "Actually, I enjoy it." James smiled. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were the most arrogant aliens I'd ever met, bragging about surviving Deathworld 9 and all that." "We were arrogant," Zortok acknowledged. "We confused technological buffers with true adaptation. Your species has mastered something more fundamental, the integration of all aspects of consciousness into a unified survival strategy." "We're far from perfect," James cautioned. "Human history is filled with catastrophic failures caused by emotional excesses, hatred, fear, greed. As is Thalaxian history filled with failures of pure rationality, inability to value diversity, to innovate beyond parameters, to sustain motivation through hardship." Zortok's scales shifted in a pattern that approximated a human shrug. "Perhaps the optimal path lies in integration rather than exclusion." In the distance, thunder rumbled, another storm approaching. Zortok felt no alarm, only a curious anticipation. Earth's challenges had not diminished, but his perception of them had transformed. This death world, with all its toxins, radiation, and biological hazards, had become something else entirely, a place of discovery, connection, and growth. Dr. Airy approached, her scales displaying the subtle pattern that had become her equivalent of a smile. "The Directorate has approved our proposal for a multi-species expedition to Deathworld 12. We'll test the integrated adaptation model in a new environment." "With human participants?" Zortok asked. "A joint team," she confirmed. "The Williams family has volunteered, along with Dante and several other students." Zortok felt something the humans called pride, not the empty arrogance of his earlier certainty, but a deeper satisfaction in collaborative achievement. "We have much to prepare," he said, watching as the first raindrops began to fall. The humans and Thalaxians moved together toward shelter, not fleeing the storm but simply adapting to it, as all successful species must. Behind them, Earth continued its rotation, indifferent to its classification as a death world or an adaptive crucible. Its challenges remained exactly as they had always been. Only the perspective of those facing them had changed, from survival against an enemy to growth within a complex system where emotions and reason together formed the strongest evolutionary strategy of all.